You know, it's funny. When you watch enough TV and movies, you start to notice these
Oh,
patterns.
yeah. Like what?
Well, like how women on screen always seem to have these tight-knit groups of friends.
Right. Sharing secrets, offering support, the whole thing.
Exactly. But with guys, it's a different story.
Yeah. More often than not, it's a lone wolf, maybe a sidekick if you're lucky.
Yeah, yeah. Makes you wonder if we're missing something when it comes to male friendships.
Interesting.
Which is exactly what we're diving into today with this article from Greater Good Science Center's magazine.
Okay, what's it called?
It's all about why male friendships matter and how to actually build those bonds.
I like it already.
Me too. But it's a little alarming too, honestly. You know how it starts, with a statistic that really jumped out at me.
Hit me.
Back in 1990, 55% of men said they had at least 6 close friends.
Okay, that makes sense. Seems like a decent number.
Right. But get this, by 2021, that number had plummeted to just 27%,
Wow.
according to the American survey at least.
That's a huge drop.
It really is a staggering drop, actually. The article even calls it a friendship recession.
Friendship recession.
Yeah, they're words. And what's interesting is it's not just about individual guys, choosing to have fewer friends.
Right, right. There's got to be something else going on.
The article points to some bigger societal changes that are making it harder for men to connect in the first place.
Okay, so like what? What kind of changes are we talking about here?
Well, think about it. There's declining involvement in things like civic groups.
True.
And then there's the rise of remote work. People aren't even leaving their houses anymore.
Yeah, you're not running into people as much as you used to.
And even something as simple as commute times, those are increasing too.
Right, right. It all adds up.
All these things mean that guys just have fewer opportunities to, organically bump into each other and start to build those bonds.
So true. It's like those classic sitcom scenes. Guys hanging out by the water cooler, making plans for the weekend. Who even does that anymore?
Right. I know. Like, it still happens, I'm sure. But does it happen as naturally as it used to? I don't know.
You've got a point there.
Yeah.
It's interesting, though, because the article mentions this one example about the author's husband.
Oh, yeah. What about him?
It's about his bachelor party.
Okay, so what happened? Wild night out.
Not even close. It was just a simple dinner
Really? That's it?
with his closest friends. No crazy antics, just good conversation and connection.
Wow. That does make you think. It's like a totally different approach to male bonding than we've been conditioned to expect. But you mentioned something earlier that I wanted to come back to about how this goes deeper than just not having enough time.
Oh, absolutely.
The article mentions something about how men are raised and the expectations they face.
You hit the nail on the head. It's not just these external factors, like being too busy. It's also the internal stuff, like psychological and social conditioning.
And that influences how men connect, or I guess in this case, how they don't.
Exactly. It's like we're conditioned to interact in this
Right.
side-by-side way,
Side by side. What do you mean by that?
as opposed to, face-to-face,
Yeah.
with direct emotional sharing and all of that.
I think I see what you're getting at.
Like, think about it. Watching a game together, working on a project,
Yeah.
activities where you're focused on the shared task,
Right.
not necessarily on expressing your deepest feelings.
Right. So the connection happens almost by default, like
Yeah.
through the activity itself,
Exactly.
which I guess that's fine. But I guess the question is, does it ever go deeper than that?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the article makes the case that this whole emphasis on, doing rather than feeling,
Yeah.
it can actually hold men back from forming those truly intimate bonds.
I guess because there's that stereotype, right, that being vulnerable isn't exactly manly.
You said it, not me. But the article actually talks about this fascinating research.
Oh, yeah. By who?
Dr. Niobe Way. She's found that, believe it or not, little boys, they actually crave those close, emotionally intimate friendships.
Really?
But then they grow up and
Society happens.
exactly, and they learn to suppress those feelings. Because, real men don't do feelings.
That's kind of a terrifying thought. Like, we're essentially conditioning boys to grow into isolated men.
Yeah, and that's something this psychologist Fred Rabinowitz has dedicated his work to understanding. The article quotes him a lot, actually.
What does he say?
Well, he talks about this whole male mythology thing.
Male mythology.
That's what he calls it. It's
Yeah.
this idea that glorifies, stoicism, self-reliance, even if it means sacrificing genuine connection.
Interesting.
And he's not just talking about this theoretically. He shares his own experiences in the article.
Oh, right. Wasn't there something about putting his arm around a friend?
Exactly, like even as a kid.
Hmm.
And it was seen as this taboo thing.
That's
And
why.
it just shows how deeply ingrained these messages are from such a young age.
Wow.
And Rabinowitz argues that this pressure to conform to this very narrow definition of masculinity has really serious consequences.
Yeah, I can see that.
Like, it's basically a recipe for loneliness and isolation.
I know what I find interesting about all of this. It's not just about the individual guy either.
That's right.
The article talks about how this can actually affect women too.
And absolutely.
Because if men are struggling to build these close friendships with other guys,
Uh-huh.
they might end up relying on women for all that emotional support.
Wives, girlfriends, family members. It's a lot of pressure to put on one person.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So not only are men missing out on these potentially amazing friendships, but it could also be placing an unfair burden on the women in their lives.
It's about having a more balanced support system,
Yeah.
not putting all your eggs in one basket, so to speak.
It's about having a variety of shoulders to lean on.
There you go.
Mhm.
And, maybe most importantly, the article reminds us that strong male friendships can be a source of real joy,
Yeah, for sure.
camaraderie, shared experiences, feeling truly known and accepted. Who wouldn't want that?
Absolutely. This has been really eye-opening so far. But before we move on, I have to ask, were men always this way? Like, is this whole friendship recession a modern thing, or are we just now talking about it?
That's a great question. And the article actually takes a really interesting turn here. It introduces this author, Marissa Franco.
Okay, and what does she have to say? Okay, and what does she have to say?
Well, Franco argues that what we think of as normal for guys being friends these days, it might actually be a pretty recent thing.
Wait, seriously, are you telling me guys haven't always been afraid to be best buds?
That's exactly what she's saying.
No way. Tell me more.
So she wrote this book, Platonic, and it's all about the history of male friendships. Fascinating stuff. She says that romantic love, not in a sexual way, but in terms of that deep emotional connection that used to be super common between men.
Hold on. Romantic love between men. Historically, okay, now I'm really lost.
I know, right? It's not what we're used to hearing these days. But Franco's point is this whole idea that men have to keep their distance emotionally, keep it all bottled up, it's a relatively new thing.
Okay, so you're telling me that back in the day, close friends, they would just express their feelings for each other openly.
Pretty much. Without all the stigma we have today, it was just a normal way of showing you cared.
So all those old paintings of like guys holding hands or writing each other poems, that wasn't considered weird back then.
Not at all. It was just how they rolled. So when we talk about this friendship recession, it's important to remember, this might not be hardwired into men. It could just be that society's changed the rules of the game.
Wow. Okay, so much to think about. But that almost makes this whole thing even more urgent, right? Like if we've lost something this valuable, how do we get it back?
Well, that's the good news. The article doesn't just leave us hanging. There's actually some really practical advice in there.
Okay, good. I'm ready for some action steps.
One of the big ones is to think about shared activities. As a starting point, at least.
Like sports.
Well, sure, sports are great, but it doesn't have to be all about sports.
Okay, good, because I was running out of jerseys to wear. So what else you got?
The possibilities are endless. Book clubs, hiking groups, volunteering, those new board game cafes that are popping up everywhere. Anything that gets you interacting with other guys regularly.
Right, just create that space for connection, even if it starts with something else.
Exactly. And then, here's the key. Once you're in those spaces, don't be afraid to get a little vulnerable. Share a story. Tell someone you appreciate them. Admit when you're struggling with something.
It's like you're giving other people permission to do the same.
Right. Exactly. Now, if you're thinking, hey, I need a little more structure than that, the article also mentions men's groups.
Makes sense, like a dedicated time and place to work on this stuff.
And there are organizations out there that can help with this too, like the Mankind Project.
Cool. I'll have to check that out.
Oh, and you know what else really resonated with me? It seems so simple, but Franco talks about the power of just taking initiative. Reach out to someone you haven't seen in a while, ask them to grab a beer, tell them you're thinking about them.
Yeah, sometimes that's the hardest part, right? Just making that first move.
It is, but the truth is, most of us are probably craving that connection more than we let on.
Totally. And it all comes back to this idea of like redefining strength. What if being vulnerable, being there for each other emotionally, what if that was seen as manly?
Wouldn't that be amazing? If guys felt empowered to just be themselves in their friendships.
Absolutely. Now that's a future worth fighting for.
Couldn't agree more.
And on that note, maybe a good challenge for all of us listening is to reach out to a friend today. Even if it's just a quick text, a phone call, whatever, you never know what kind of connection you might spark. That's all we've got for this deep dive on male friendship. Until next time, keep those connections strong.